Some of the most creative games ever made didn't fail. They were eliminated. Games like Katamari Damacy, where you roll up the entire world into a ball, or Shadow of the Colossus, where most of the game is just silence and empty space. These weren't accidents. They were allowed to exist by an industry that doesn't exist anymore. Because today, these kinds of games don't just struggle to succeed, they struggle to get made at all. We might explain this by simply saying games changed, players grew up, the market just moved on. And on the surface, that is somewhat true. Modern games are bigger, they're more ambitious, more realistic. But that explanation has a problem, because interest in creative and unique games never actually disappeared. Many of them are still remembered, still talked about, and still celebrated decades later. So, if the audience didn't reject these games, then who did? Take Eco, for example, a beloved classic from the early PS2 era. It sold around 700,000 copies worldwide. Not massive, but far from irrelevant. More importantly, it became one of the most influential games of the era. Its director, Fumito Ueda, built it with a team of only about 20 people. We'll come back to that fact in just a moment. They intentionally removed traditional game elements. No clutter, no noise, almost no user interface. At the time, that wasn't a problem. It was just a different kind of experience, and a welcome one. Or look at Shadow of the Colossus, another game that broke the traditional mold. When you defeat a boss in the game, the music doesn't play a victory fanfare. Instead, it mourns. Ueda said his own staff thought it was a bug and that something was wrong with the game, because games weren't supposed to feel that way. It was that different kind of approach, though, that struck a chord with gamers. But here's the point. These types of games weren't rejected by players. They would be rejected by what the industry would become. To understand why, you have to look at how the industry shifted, and it starts with something simple. Budgets. During the PlayStation 2 era, games were relatively affordable to make. Small teams could experiment. Publishers could afford to take risks. If a game failed, it wasn't the end of the world. But when the industry moved into the HD era, things were different. By the late 2000s, Ubisoft's CEO was already warning that top-tier games could cost around $60 million to make. And that number would only increase. Today, major releases can push past $100, $200, even $300 million. That fact changed the rules. Creativity stopped being a feature and started being a risk. When the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 launched, they didn't just make better graphics possible, they made them expected. Things like high-definition textures, detailed animations, cinematic presentation, all of that became the new baseline, which meant even a simple game was no longer simple to make. The hardware didn't just expand what games could do, it quietly removed what they were allowed to be. Now remember Eco and its team of about 20 people? That kind of project used to fit comfortably inside the industry. But in the modern era, projects have scaled up and costs multiplied. Today, comparable releases can involve hundreds of team members, and the more people involved, the harder it becomes to justify something unproven. A small, ambiguous, experimental game isn't just a creative risk, it's a financial one. And financial risks usually do not get the green light. Now, by this point, it wasn't about whether experimental games could succeed anymore. It was about whether they'd even be allowed to exist. At the same time, something else was happening. The industry got better at measuring player behavior, retention rates, engagement curves, completion data. Games stopped being judged purely on vision and started being judged on player behavior. Think again about Shadow of the Colossus and the way it was designed. Long stretches of silence, no constant rewards, no engagement loops. From a modern metrics perspective, That type of silence looks like disengagement. Ambiguity looks like confusion. And anything that doesn't constantly reward the player, well, that looks like failure. These types of games weren't just risky. They were unmeasurable. They weren't designed to optimize attention. They were designed to create a feeling. And feelings don't fit nicely on a spreadsheet. Then there's one more shift. As the cost of making a game increased, publishers stopped asking, "Is this interesting?" and started asking, "Is this safe?" And the safest answer became a franchise. Today, companies openly structure themselves around major IPs, Assassin's Creed, Call of Duty, Far Cry, because when a single game can cost hundreds of millions of dollars, you don't bet on something unknown. You bet on something familiar. Even a strange series like Katamari Damacy shows this shift. Its creator, Keita Takahashi, stepped away from the series, even though the IP that he created continues. In a way, we could say the industry no longer values the unique idea. It values the recognizable brand. All of this builds to a single tipping point, the move into the 7th generation, the jump from the PlayStation 2 to the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, because that's where the math changed. The PlayStation 2 sold over 160 million units. It created a massive, forgiving ecosystem where smaller games could survive. There was nearly 50% more games released for the PS2 than the PS3. In the 7th generation, costs expanded beyond the safety net. Expectations rose faster than budgets could support, and experimentation stopped being sustainable. It became irresponsible. This is the point where weird games didn't just become rare, they became nearly financially impossible to justify. So, did these kinds of games completely disappear? Not exactly. It's more like they moved. Experimental design didn't die, it just left the center. Today you still see strange and creative ideas, but they're smaller now, less visible. They stopped shaping the center of the industry and started orbiting around it. They exist in indie spaces, lower budget environments. The weird game survived, the weird AAA game did not. Now, at the same time, the center of the industry changed. Modern AAA games have become bigger, more cinematic, more formulaic, for better or worse. Not because developers lost creativity, but because the system rewards predictability. When a game costs $100 million, $200 million, sometimes more, failure isn't just disappointing, it's catastrophic. So the question isn't, is this interesting? It's, can this fail? And if the answer is yes, it usually does not get made. So when you look back at games like Ico, Shadow of the Colossus, Katamari Damacy, any of the other numerous unique and creative games that you can remember, it's tempting to think that they were special because of the people who made them. In fact, they were. But that's not the whole story. They were also products of a system that could afford to take risks, a system where teams could be small, budgets could be contained, and success didn't have to be massive. That system is gone. Under the rules they now operate by, most major studios can't afford to take those risks. The industry didn't lose its imagination. It priced imagination out of the spotlight. So, what do you think? Did the industry evolve, or did it close off possibilities? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you made it this far, as always, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, happy gaming, my friends.